and political will pushes state and federal governments towards reducing the prison population, Louisiana stands apart in its steadfast resistance against this trend. It has the highest incarceration rate of any state in the country. And according to data from the Prison Policy Initiative, as incarceration rates remained steady in most all other states and even declined in some, Louisiana's rate has only risen, approaching 900 inmates for every 100,000 people in the state. And no city in Louisiana houses a larger proportion by population of those inmates than New Orleans, which has the highest incarceration rate not only in the state, but of any city in the United States. For most of those prisoners, the responsibility for ensuring their right to a robust defense falls squarely on the shoulders of the Orleans public defenders. In a recent editorial for the Washington Post, one of those lawyers says the small organization represents 85% charged with crimes in Orleans Parish on an annual budget a third the size of the district attorneys. And now, facing $1 million deficit because of statewide budget cuts, the already overburdened office will have to do even more with even less. For the attorneys, avoiding layoffs will mean 4 weeks of unpaid furloughs, a heavier caseload, a hiring freeze, and for many of their clients, the denial of their constitutional right to representation. Joining us now from New Orleans, Louisiana, is Derwin Bunton, who is Chief District Defender for Orleans Parish. What in the world is going on in my city?
Well, thank you for having me on the show. One of the things that's going on in the city is we are illustrating what has become a growing trend across the country, and that is a user-paid criminal justice system that is inadequate, unpredictable, and unreliable when it comes to resources. And so that has come home to roost as we've seen state budgets decline and our own revenues go down.
Explain the user pay piece. Folks may not understand where the money for the public defender's office comes from there.
Well, statewide, 2/3 of public defender budgets rely on court costs, fines, and fees. That is what is paid by our clients, the people going through the system. So the system depends in an inordinate way on the fines and fees from people moving through it for its operation. And that yields some wild results. And when you have a system that is aimed at the most vulnerable and poorest in a community, to depend on those poor and vulnerable to actually fund its operation provides the results that we are decrying right now.
So one more piece on this, because I find whenever we do work around prisons and criminal justice, the responses sometimes are like, well, why should I care? Aren't these people criminals? What's the constitutional issue at stake here?
Well, the constitutional issue at stake here is the Sixth Amendment. Everyone has a right to a lawyer. Everyone has a right to a defense when the government is prosecuting you. And what we have right now is a system here in New Orleans and across the country that is so disparate and so overwhelming. If you're looking at criminal justice reform and you're wondering why we have so many people in prison, you need only look at public defense, and then you know you have to reform that as part of this system. We have checks and balances in our government. We don't have checks and balances in our criminal justice system. That is the role of public defenders, and it has gone lacking over these past few years. We have a budget a third the size of our DA. They have 30 investigators. We have 8. They have 90 lawyers. We have 40. And they have a $135 million police force investigating their cases for them. And when you look at that, you understand that there's just in Louisiana about 1% to 2% of the funding goes to make sure someone is represented, that they are represented appropriately and their rights are protected. The rest is to catch, secure, and convict.
Derwin, stick with us, don't go away. But, E.J., I wanted to give you a chance to weigh in, both on this and the other issues we've been talking about.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One, just to go back to ban the box, getting rid of that box where people have to say whether they have a criminal record, that could make an enormous difference in at least opening the first round of possibility for people. And it's very important the federal government encourage everybody to do that. Secondly, on this issue of bipartisanship on criminal justice reform, up to this point, there have been a lot of promising signs, and there are a bunch of conservatives, groups like Right on Crime, who have come to criminal justice reform because they don't like the government to spend a lot of money. And they realize the government's spending a lot of money on prisons. Some of them are libertarians who actually care about this. I am very worried that we may be entering another and more destructive phase where a lot of the constructive work that's gone on for the last several years to try to get us to the point where we can reform this system may get caught right back up into 1960s, early 70s style politics. You have Donald Trump talking about the silent majority, talking about law and order. In some cities, you're seeing an increase in the murder rate. I'm worried, the low crime rates relative to the past have opened up this opportunity, and I hope we don't lose it.
But it's interesting, even as you're talking about the economic piece, I want to come to Mark, because, Derwin's saying here, okay, fine, spend less money on prisons, but maybe we should spend more on criminal defense also of the indigent.
Well, the whole system is just starved for resources, and just shameful the way we process cases through the courts as if it's an assembly line or so. So it just reinforces why we need to end mass incarceration. There are other legitimate needs in the criminal justice system, and certainly legitimate needs in the communities that those prisoners come from. And one of the main ways we can deal with that is to cut back on the $80 billion we're spending on corrections every year. We're not going to abolish prisons tomorrow. Nobody's calling for that, but we could have a substantial reduction that would ensure that when people are charged with a crime, they would get a real defense and have a chance to present their case in court, not just be one of a number of people.
Derwin, I want to come back to you just real quick on this before we head out, because the other thing going on in Orleans, I just don't want to miss this, is that Sheriff Gussman, who just opened his new prison this week, has also moved more than 200 inmates to far-flung parishes, making it harder for you all, even harder for you all to even represent your clients. We have no time, but I just at least wanted to also get that on the table here. That's another thing you guys are dealing with.
Absolutely. What that did essentially is make our clients incommunicado. That made it impossible for them to affect their constitutional rights, access to courts, and right to counsel. It also increased costs. I think what people don't understand, there's been studies by the Justice Policy Institute and others that shows us criminal justice system with a well-funded public defender's office actually reduces costs. We can control length of stay by properly presenting cases to the courts and arguing for release and the appropriate amount of time for the appropriate crime.
I got to tell you, Derwin Button in New Orleans, it is keep fighting the good fight down there. Here in Washington, I want to say thank you to E.J. Dionne and to Mark Maurer. Congresswoman Barbara Lee and Wade Henderson are going to be back with us, but still to come, Batman.